Thanks, Manting, for introduction, and thanks to the Buddhist Fellowship for hosting me and hosting us all here to come together to practice Dhamma. So we've got a few people coming in. Still plenty of room at the front. Everyone always sits at the back. All right, very good. You know what the trick is? You only put the cushions at the front. And people come and sit there, and then you put one layer, one row, and people fit them up. That's the trick.
Yesterday we left the cushions empty and they still sat at the back.
All right. So can't begin the meditation until everyone's settled down, so feel a few people coming in and out. But anyway, while we're just sitting here, is everybody? Would you all like to do some meditation? Yes. Okay. You want to do some meditation? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Very good. So one of the things about Buddhism is that it's all about what your choice. Right? We're not coming here telling you have to meditate. We're not coming. We just took the precepts. 𝐴𝑚𝑖𝑑 samadhiyami. I undertake the precepts. Right? You're the one who decided you want to keep those precepts. Okay. So do not blame me. Okay. You say, I went into the monastery and now my life is no fun. Those monks made me keep these rules. No. You are the one who decided you want to keep those rules. Okay. Because you. And I know this might come as a shock to some of you, but you are responsible adults. I know, right? Hard to hear those words sometimes. Right? We don't feel like that. It's one of the great lessons about growing up, that they don't tell you when you're younger, that your body gets old, but your mind stays just as stupid as it was when you were a teenager. But you're a responsible adult. And you make your own choices. Same thing with meditation, right? So we're not here to tell you you should meditate or you have to meditate or anything like that. But if you want to meditate, then we can help to support you to do that. Now we're going to do about 10 minutes or so of a guided meditation. Now, first of all, let me ask: is there anybody here who has never meditated before? Anyone? This is introduction to meditation. No? Everybody has meditated before. I find that a little bit hard to believe. Sure. Okay. Good. Yeah, great. But also bad. Yes. Because every time you meditate, it's good, but also you set up an expectation what your meditation should be. Sometimes a good expectation, sometimes a bad expectation, sometimes you have a good experience, and you're like, how can I get back to that good experience? Well, I do know a way you can get back to that good experience. You want to know what that is? It's called a 𝐴𝑚𝑖𝑑. Because you have to travel back in time to that point and do that same thing again. Well, that's the only way. It's a 𝐴𝑚𝑖𝑑. That's it. But if you don't have a 𝐴𝑚𝑖𝑑, then you can't get back to that because it's in the past. So what do you want to get back to the past for? So what you want to have is the experience now. So each time we meditate, we approach it now. it's in the present, and each meditation is different and new. All right, so how about we're doing some meditation over the last couple of days, and we've been doing some mindfulness of breathing meditation. How about for a bit of a change, we do some loving kindness meditation? Would you like to do that? Okay, very good. Okay, we'll do a short guided metta meditation, and for this meditation, we're going to do metta for oneself. Okay, so that's you, and number two is somebody who's a loved person. Okay, so just one person who is easy for you to feel metta for. All right? Let's go. Okay, so sitting quietly. Bringing just a sense of peace and ease to your mind and body. Now, leaving your mind settle in your heart, say to yourself the words, may I be happy, may I be happy, may I be happy. And just keep saying those words again and again and again, evenly, steadily. Making a firm foundation for your mind. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be happy. And as you continue with those words, notice that along with the words of metta is also the feeling of metta. The soft, gentle feeling of warmth and love arises in your heart, spills out and spreads through your whole body. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be happy. And letting that feeling of metta spread out through your body. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be happy. And then bringing in the name of that loved person. May that loved one be happy. May that loved one be happy. May that loved one be happy. Just putting their name in the words of metta. May they be happy. May they be happy. Keeping your mind settled and grounded inside your body. Feeling the feeling of metta soaking through your whole body. May they be happy. May they be happy. May they be happy. And now spreading metta out to all the people in this room. May all the people in this room be happy. May all the people in this room be happy. May all people in this room be happy. May they be happy. May they be happy. May they be happy. Now coming back to oneself. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be happy. letting the words of metta go, and letting the feeling of metta fade away, and allowing the mind to return to a neutral space, empty, open and clear. And then finally you can open your eyes and come out of meditation. Very good. So welcome to everyone who's just arriving. Very glad you could make it. You know there's no right time for the Dhamma. Do you know that?
So Bhante, am I right that you're not putting any material on the street?
That's correct. Not putting anything
I
on
think
there.
maybe you won't need to look at anything on the screen, so feel free to move forward a bit more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we go? Very good.
All good.
All good. So I'm Bhante Sujato, and time for some Dhamma talk. So we're going to have some Dhamma talk now until about 20, 30 minutes, and then some Q&A. Does that sound like good? Anyone have any questions they want to ask to start with? Anyone got any suggestions for the Dhamma talk? Yes? No? Oh dear, okay. Well, just one topic that I just mentioned, which I think is a kind of a nice one to start with. So that there is no time for the Dhamma. And one of the things about the Buddha's teachings is the Buddha's teaching is for everyone. Doesn't matter what background you are, doesn't matter what race or gender you are, doesn't matter what language you speak. None of these things really matter. What matters is, do you suffer? Yes. Do you suffer? Yes. What? I thought Singapore was a paradise. Haven't you solved all problems here? No? Didn't I read a survey some years ago that said that the majority of Singaporeans reported having no feelings whatsoever? Is that right? Is it like an operation that you have or something? Anyway, so this is part of human experience, right? We all experience suffering, we all experience happiness, and the Buddha's teachings is for those who feel Vedi Manasa. It's a really profound statement in the suttas, which I think is somewhat kind of underestimated. Or underappreciated. 𝐴𝑚𝑖𝑑, Buddha said, I teach the Dhamma for one who feels. And sometimes when we're practicing the Dhamma, or just living, and sometimes we get down, sometimes we feel depressed, sometimes we suffer from anxiety, stress. Anyone here get stressed out at work? Yes, everyone gets stressed out at work. Why do we do it? Work makes everyone stressed. We should just stop it. It seems like a sensible idea. But, the thing is, though, if you did stop it, you'd be really bored. I mean, you're probably bored at work. Yeah. Heard a joke, or somebody said once, they said they were at work one day and they got so bored they just decided to just do some work. So anyway, this is part of who we are. So the first thing I think to really to understand is, remember, as practitioners and as Dhamma practitioners, right, we don't be afraid of suffering. Suffering is okay. It's just a feeling. It's all right. It's not a great feeling, right? You shouldn't be inviting it or celebrating it or anything, but it's okay. And, this is something that I find, you get into that kind of trap again and again. I went to the dentist the other day and they had to pull this tooth out. It was really painful, and the anesthetic didn't really take properly. And I was like, it's just pain. It's just pain. And you can sort of see that feeling inside. After so many years of meditating and practicing and things, you still feel that kind of anticipation. Oh, this is going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And oh yeah, it really does hurt. But actually, it's just pain. It's all right. It hurt for a while, and then it didn't. So why are we so afraid of it? Why are we so afraid of suffering? So it doesn't matter whether we're old, we're young, in between, we will always experience these things. And we have experienced suffering in a different way. Now, of course, some people don't like to think that they suffer, especially younger people. Right? So that when you're young, you tend to think that you're immortal, that if you get sick, then your body's going to get better, and you feel like you're not going to be breakable, and all these things. I mean, you know that that's not true, right? I mean, it's not like you believe that, but unconsciously, that's how you act, And gradually, you get older, you begin to realize that these things are not true. And so there was a custom in, I'm not sure how really widespread it was, but in Indian culture there was a custom that there was different stages of your life that you should go through. So when you're younger, you need to do your studies, and then when you get a bit older, then you start your family, and then when you get a bit older still, you can then retire and then go off to the forest and do meditation or something like that, the different stages of life. But in Buddhism, we've never really had that idea. So the Buddha always said that the Dhamma is for anyone. And it really is kind of interesting, because I don't know about you, but I've met a number of young people who have this kind of almost preternatural wisdom or affiliation or connection with the Dhamma. I remember one time when I was in Melbourne a few years ago, and there was a monk, and he was just a Burmese monk, and he was showing me, we were just talking about some of the programs, I think in Penang actually. Anyway, some of the program he was doing somewhere, and he did a youth program. There's 100 kids there doing this program. And there was one of the girls there, and I pointed to her and said, who's that? He just looked at me and said, she's really incredible. There's something about her caught my eye. She was 11 or something. She was sitting there with a group of kids. And he said, she's such a good meditator. She would just sit there and meditate for hours and just has this kind of presence. I could just see in that photo of her. And so sometimes it's like that. People are just born and have this wisdom and have this something. I guess it's from past lives, right? But, that's where these things come from. Sometimes we encounter the Dhamma when we grow up. Right? So maybe, I think for a lot of people, especially when you're in your teen years, it's a good time for encountering Dhamma, because you've got all of these questions. And the teen years are usually the time when you realize the horrifying truth, which is that your parents don't know everything. Sorry to So if there are any parents who are still maintaining that illusion with their kids, I'm sorry to blow your cover here. But, and so you realise your parents don't know everything, and you have to sort of start making your own life in this world. Yeah? And this can be a problem, right? Because, on the one hand, when parents bring up kids, the parents want to bring up their kids with a certain set of values, and they want to bring them up to, they have an idea in their mind of how they want their kids to be and what career they want and all of these kinds of things. Sometimes that's what the kids want, sometimes it's not. And so then that can be cause of a lot of struggle, especially if the kids want to do something that the parents don't want to do. In fact, people ask me this quite often, especially kids from Chinese background. They say they want to become a monk or they want to become a nun. And their parents don't really want to let them. And this can be a real struggle. And I think it's interesting, to think like in Chinese culture, Buddhism's been there for 2,000 years. Right? And yet there's still this kind of struggle. I think it's important to acknowledge that because it's a genuine thing. It's actually a really important thing about how do we make these choices. And it's not like there are good guys or bad guys in this. But it's just important, I think, to respect both sides in their understanding. When I was a number of years ago, there was a young Indian man who wanted to ordain. It was the same kind of thing. He was like in his early 20s. He wanted to ordain. And his parents were like absolutely adamant that he couldn't ordain, right? Absolutely dead set against it. And he wrote a letter to Wat Nanachat in Thailand to say, he wanted to ordain, but his parents didn't want him to. And the secretary at that time was a friend of mine, Venerable Yatika, and he wrote back a letter, and he was the one who told me about this. He wrote back a letter to this young man and said, look, it's always really important to respect what your parents want. And, if you want to ordain, then that's a great intention, and that's really important. But you just try to find a way that you can do that, or try to find a way that you can fulfill your spiritual needs that's not going to cause that suffering to your parents. Now, the parents, meanwhile, so this was back in the old days when they wrote letters. You remember letters? Paper and pens? Put it in an envelope, you put a bit of glue on it, you put a stamp on it, and you send it, yeah. So this is in the old days, a letter. And the parents were so suspicious about their son that they intercepted his letter and read it. They thought that was bad, isn't it, right? And when they read it and they saw that the monk in Thailand had been so kind and so respectful to the parents and their needs, that they were just full of shame. They thought that their son was getting involved in a cult and that he's going to be taken off and that they'd never see him. And they saw this and they realised it wasn't like that at all. And they just started crying, and they went to see their son and asked apologies from their son. And they said, yes, you can ordain if you want. So then he went to Thailand and ordained. Yeah, so that's how that story ended up anyway. So this is a genuine struggle, right? One of the things about Buddhism, right? One of the kind of the structures of Buddhism, we have the fourfold community: laymen, laywomen, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And that fourfold structure sets up there's a kind of a tension in that structure always. And the kind of the existence of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis is meant to be there in order to be a bit troubling to you. When I was at my mum's house, she'd been married, and my stepfather was he was like it wasn't 90, he was like an 80-year-old Englishman. And he saw what I was like carrying my luggage and things, and he said, I could never be a monk. I'm like, I don't think anyone was really thinking that you would be a monk. But somehow there's that question mark, right? This is the samana dasana, right? Somehow there's a question mark, what's that? Yeah, and there's some calling to that which raises this question mark. Maybe could there be something else? I think about my attraction to Buddhism, like why I became a Buddhist, and it's very, obviously it's very unusual. But my first like when I was brought up in Perth. in those days Australia was very different. Now, these days Australia is a very multicultural country. In those days it wasn't. And when I grew up there, basically it's all pretty much just white people everywhere. And I never encountered Buddhism, didn't know any Buddhists, nothing, right? But I had one of my first memory of Buddhism is a memory of a documentary, probably on the ABC, a documentary about an Australian Buddhist nun. And she'd ordained in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And, I still have a memory in my mind of this woman with the shaven head and the robes. I can't remember anything else. I know that there was maybe 2 or 3 women who ordained in the Tibetan tradition in the 70s in Australia, so it must have been one of them who this documentary was about. I just remember something about her I don't know, her peacefulness or her mood or something about it stuck with me for all of those years. I really feel that kind of planted a seed for me to ordain. So eventually, later on I ordained, and people ask me, what did your parents think when you ordained? Did they like that idea or not? I say, look, if you want to ordain and your parents don't want you to ordain, here's how to do it. Number 1, join a rock band. Okay? Grow your hair long, get a few tats, and then your parents will be thrilled when you tell them you're doing anything else. Very simple. It's a really simple process. So it worked for me. What can I say? So for young people or people interested in to ordain, then my advice always would be don't worry about it too much, don't think about it too much, but just go and stay in a monastery for a while. That's all. It's pretty easy to go and stay. You can pop up to Malaysia or something like that. There's some good forest monasteries and things, or go to Indonesia and just stay for a little while, just a few days. If you like it, go back and stay again, and then just get a kind of feel for what that lifestyle involves. So don't overthink it. There's nothing worse than that. I always would find that in monasteries, if somebody came to the monastery and said, I want to ordain. I've closed all my bank accounts. I've given everything away. I've come here to ordain. And we'd be like, okay, well, we can book someone else in his kuti in 2 weeks. And then they'd be out the door, right? Because they've got this idea of what it is. But if somebody comes and says, well, I'm here to try it out, I say, okay, try it out and see. Maybe they stay, maybe they don't. So for many people, of course, people encounter Dhamma at different ages. A lot of people also encounter Dhamma like in middle age. People have a middle age crisis, right? So middle age crisis is merely one variety of the ever existential crisis. In fact, most of us who encounter Dhamma will encounter it through some form of existential crisis. And so an existential crisis is basically a crisis of meaning and value. You sort of question, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? And that might come from a lot of places. It might come from just reflection. It might come from something that you read. It might come from the death of a family member. And it could come from all different kinds of things. And it awakens this kind of questioning that we have. And a lot of times this happens in middle life, in middle age, because you've done your studies, you've got your career, you've got your family, all of those things are there, and you're like, now what? Right? Am I just going to stay in this job and get a promotion? Okay. What am I going to do? And in a few years' time, your kids are going to be grown up, they're going to leave home. What are you going to do? And it's not at all obvious, right? And life doesn't give us these things, If you look back like traditional societies, then they would have like different initiations and different stages of life, and they would like lead you through life stages and have like a role for you to play. But we don't really do that anymore. And so we leave it up to you to decide, what are you going to do? And so this again is another time when a lot of people might come to the Dhamma because they feel they're looking for something more, something that can help them to grow. Actually, I see this a lot in Australia. Particularly, I help to teach a course on Buddhism and psychotherapy in Australia. And with Professor 𝐾𝐻𝐭𝐨 was the founder of it. And mainly what we find in that group, mainly the students in that group, they're all qualified, experienced therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, and mostly they sort of reach a point where they realize that they can do a certain amount with the skills and the knowledge that they have, but basically what they're doing is kind of alleviating symptoms, and they're beginning to ask, well, what more? What more can I be doing? And then sometimes they're like, I don't know, both for their own personal growth, but also for the way that they're relating to their clients. They're looking for something that they can grow, some spiritual path, and this is what Buddhism offers them. So then other people encounter Dhamma later in life. Yeah? Maybe you're retired. Yeah? You don't know what's there. And suddenly you've got all of this time to spend. I don't know about you, but a lot of people seem to find that they think that there'd be a lot of free time when they retire, and then they retire and there's like no free time at all. I don't know if that's your experience. And but that's another time that people can reevaluate and can come to the Dhamma. So when I started it, I had started this talk. I had this idea: there's no right time for the Dhamma, and that reminded me of a particular story. So I'll just tell you that story now to wrap up. So this story is set in the time of King Ashoka. So you know about King Ashoka? Yes, hopefully. Anyone not know about King Ashoka? Anyone? A few? No? Yes? Yes? No? Okay, good, thank you. So King Ashoka was a king who lived in India about 150 years after the Buddha. And I'll just say it kind of very briefly, but when he came to power, he inherited the greatest empire that India had known up to that point. Most of all the north of India was all under his power. And when he first came to power, he was a very brutal king. And he invaded the region of Andhra Pradesh, and they made a victory ceremony where they cut off 100,000 heads of all of their enemies and lined them down the road and walked down the road for their victory celebration. That's the kind of man that he was. Then, thankfully, for the people of India, he found Buddhism. And one of the ways that we know about King Ashoka, we know about him from various legends and stories in Buddhism, but we also know about him from inscriptions that were written in his own words. And so when we go to India, you can actually see the pillars or the inscriptions that he wrote. A really remarkable record of this king from this ancient world. And one of his inscriptions talks about how sorry he was for the harm that he did to the people of Andhra. And he said he's filled with remorse for all of the bad things that he'd done. And just like, how rare is this for a king to do that? You know, he's still at the apex of his power. He's ruling the most mighty kingdom, probably the biggest kingdom in the world at that time. And just expresses this really heartfelt remorse. And not just to express that remorse, but because he converted to Buddhism, he said, I'm going to spend my life making up for that. And so he spent the rest of his life doing everything he could to try to bring goodness to the people. And so King Ashoka always talked about Dharma. He didn't talk about Buddhism all that much. Like, he talked about Buddhism sometimes, but mostly he talked about Dharma. And so he taught about goodness, about being generous, about being kind, about looking after your parents. He set up like medical facilities. He set up procedures where citizens could bring their complaints to the king, and all of these kinds of things that he did. And all of these talked about in the inscriptions that he made. And so this is always regarded as kind of like a golden age of Buddhist kingship. And even today, the Indian flag has the wheel from King Ashoka on it, and so it's regarded as kind of a golden age in that way. So it also is regarded as a golden age in many ways of Buddhism, because Buddhism had spread greatly from the time of the Buddha and now covered all of, basically pretty much most of mainland India except for the very south. And Ashoka introduced Buddhism also to Sri Lanka, to the northwest to Kashmir, and also to the east to Suvarnabhumi. which scholars argue about, but the Burmese say is Burma and the Thais say is Thailand, and probably a bit of both, and maybe Malaysia as well. Anyway, so this King Ashoka. So now in the time of King Ashoka there was a great monk called Upagupta, and he was regarded as the greatest teacher of that time. And this is not a story about Upagupta so much, but he does it appears in the legends of Upagupta. Anyway, so in those days, King Ashoka wanted to organize a big ceremony to invite all of the Sangha to come and participate in this big offering ceremony. And all of the great monks were going to be there, right? All of the very highly attained arahants, all of the secluded monks, all of the great scholars, everyone was going to come. Now, as it happened, the senior monk in that big assembly, right, who had been ordained the longest time, and he'd actually been ordained, I think he'd been ordained by Ananda himself. Right? So we're talking, it's not that long after the time of the Buddha. So I think he was maybe like the last disciple of Ananda. Don't quote me on that, I might have got that detail wrong. Anyway, he was the most senior monk, right? But he'd never meditated. And he'd never done any Dhamma practice and never got any benefit from the Dhamma. But because he was senior, he was invited to that, and because he was senior, he was going to be put at the head of the line of all of the monks. Kind of embarrassing. So this nun, the bhikkhuni, came to visit him, who knew him, and she came and she bowed to him because he was the senior monk there, and she said to him, "Venerable Sir, you are not entirely proper." And then she left, and the monk was saying, "What does she mean by that? I'm not entirely proper." And he was like, "Oh, hang on, yeah, I forgot to shave. Yeah, right, I have to go back and shave. Good, okay, fine." So he comes back the next day, and then she bows down again. She says, "Venerable Sir, you are not entirely proper." He said, "But she said, I shaved. What's he talking about?" He said, "Oh yeah, I've got a tear in my robe. Yeah, I should repair this. Yeah, make sure that I patch that up before we have our big ceremony. I wouldn't want to have a tear in my robe." And so sewed that up, come back the next day, and she bowed and said, "Venerable Sir, you are not entirely proper." He's like, but sister, what are you saying? I've shaved my head, I've repaired my robe, what else is there? And she said, it's not by a shaven head and a robe that one becomes entirely proper in the sasana of the Buddha. And when she said that, then he knew what she meant, and he broke down in tears, and he confessed to her. He said, "I've been ordained since I was a boy, and I've lived among all of these great monks and his great teaching, and for that whole time, I've just wasted my time, and I've never taken the opportunity to practice, and I've just let my life drift by me. And now," he said, "now I'm too old. Now I'm too old to meditate. Yeah, I can't practice." And she said to him, "Venerable Sir, there is no age in the Dhamma. It is never too old to practice." And so she sent him to Venerable Upagupta, who was the great meditation teacher at the time. And he said to him the same thing. He said, "There's no age in the Dhamma. Never too late to start." Yeah? And so he practiced, got enlightened, then went back, sitting at the head of the big Sangha of monks, and the bhikkhuni comes up and says, "Venerable Sir, today you are entirely proper." So that's just a little story about the age in the Dhamma. So it's a bit of just saying a few words to encourage people wherever you're at, whether young, middle-aged or old. Dhamma is for everybody. Right? We all suffer, and whatever we can do, if you're young, don't think, I'm going to put it off until I'm older. Right? And then when you get old, don't think, I'm too old, then it's for the young people to do it. Yeah? So don't worry about it. Just do what you can. And whatever situation that you're in, whether you're living at home, whether you're living by yourself, whether you're living with a family, whatever your situation you're living in, here's the thing: is like no situation is perfect. Like even in that case, you had a monk who had everything that he could have to be able to practice Dhamma, but he just didn't. Yeah? I mean, it happens, right? People waste their lives sometimes. So don't let that be you. Yeah? Don't be thinking, if I was like this, I could practice. If I was like that, I could practice. The practice is right here. Practice is in the present. Practice is what you're doing right now. All right, so that's just a few thoughts for you this morning. Now, do we have time for some questions? What do you think?
We do. I think we can take 2 questions. Maybe.
Okay.
That should be a comfortable time for us. If anyone has any questions, we'll pass the mic around. Or fully enlightened already? No questions? Oh, there's one there. Anyone else? So I can pass the mic to you in preparation? Okay. And then the second one here.
Thank you, Bhante. A friend posed me this question on WhatsApp.
Okay.
I play the piano and I can spend hours practicing. That's not very conducive for one who wants to be enlightened in this sense. Guess I'm not ready. What advice would you give?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question.
She feels guilty because although she wants to practice the Dhamma, she enjoys playing the piano and she spends hours playing the piano.
Is this the same person who asked me a question the other day?
Oh, I'm not sure.
It's from you.
Sorry about it.
So is the question answered now? Or you still... my answer is don't worry about it. If you like playing the piano, you're not hurting anyone. Right? Yes. Yes. All right. There's lots of people doing really terrible things in the world. Don't be worried about playing the piano. Okay.
Okay. Morning, Bhante.
Good morning. How are you today?
Good so far.
You're good?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I attended your Friday session, Bhante. Just would like to ask a simple question about the 5 aggregates.
Okay.
I am not very sure whether what is the difference between perceptions and mental formations,
Okay.
as well as sense consciousness.
Okay.
So this has been a question that has been always on my mind. I hope you can actually just simplify it, give a simpler explanation. Yeah, hopefully I can help me in my practice. Yeah, because the other question that I have is actually related to what you mentioned on Friday.
Okay.
How do we form our sense of self? And is it really, how can I practice so that to really just let go of the sense of self? Yeah.
Great question. Thank you.
Whichever you would wish to attend. Thank you.
Okay, great questions. Just quickly glancing at the clock before I try to answer those questions in brief. But okay, the first one was about sanya and sankhara in the 5 aggregates, right? So sanya usually translated as perception. Sankhara, you translated as mental formation, which I don't really like that translation. It's very variably translated because it's a difficult word to capture the exact idea in English. Sometimes mental formation, sometimes mental activities, sometimes fabrications. I translate it as choices. Okay. Controversial translation. Some people tell me I'm wrong or whatever, so good on them. I'm not, but good on them. So why did I translate it in that way, right? Because we can look at the sankharas from a number of different angles, but the primary meaning, the basic meaning of sankharas is what do you actually do? Particularly, what do you do? Like the root to sankhara is from the root to do. Right? So sankhara is what do you do? Specifically, it's about what do you do that's informed by morality. Do you do good? Do you do bad? So sankhara is very similar in meaning to karma in that way. Right? So it's our choices to do good, choices to do bad. Now in English you have a kind of a nuance in English where you could translate that as intentions, okay? Similar kind of meaning. But in English, if you say you have good intentions, usually you mean you're doing something bad, right? How did that end up such a disaster? Well, they had good intentions, right? That's kind of how you use that in English, right? Whereas we usually, like idiomatically, we say, "Oh, if somebody makes good choices, right? How did you end up living in poverty?" Well, I made some bad choices when I was younger, right? So this is that idea of good and bad choices is those things that we decide to do that have consequences, have moral consequences. So this is why I translate sankhara as choices. So sanya comes before sankhara. So all of these five aggregates, they become more sophisticated as they go, and we can kind of identify them with stages of development, stages of human growth. The development of sanya happens when you're a kid, and you learn language. You learn to recognize things, you learn to recognize the world around you, and you learn to make sense of things. This is what sanya is. So sanya is you're driving along the road, you see a stop sign, you know that means stop. This is your perception, right? Sankhara, do you actually stop? Or do you accelerate? Right? That's your choice. Yeah? So sankhara is something that you do in response, right? Sanya is recognizing how the world is. So sanya is more of an automatic thing. Right? Whereas sankhara is something that you can choose to do one thing or the other. All right? So hopefully that's helped to understand that. And then the next question is, how do you build up a sense of self? Well, we can explain that from a similar way, that your sense of self is built up from the choices that you make. Yeah? So sense of self is not something that you just have. It's something that you build and you create. But the sense of self kind of sustains itself because it kind of loops around in time. Because you make a certain choice, and then that becomes your perception. And then that informs your next choice, and then that becomes your perception again. So it's always sort of self-reinforcing, but also can be self-reflecting, right? Because sometimes you might make a choice, and when that happens, you're like, oh, actually, that was really, I don't want to be that person, you know? I've ended up in this situation, doing this thing. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And then that can cause you to reflect, and then you say, no, I'm going to make better choices in the future. Yeah? So this is not a fixed process. It's not or the self is not a fixed entity. This is really what the Buddha meant when he's talking about not self, right? I mean, obviously, in a sense, we have a self. We're a person, we do things and so on. But that's not fixed. So it's always subject to reflection. It's always changing and evolving. And the way that happens, the primary thing that drives that is our choices, our sankharas. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Very good.
Okay, so I think considering time, we will go into sharing of merits and requests of blessings from Ajahn. For those with more questions, there is a talk tomorrow evening in Mangala Vihara. You can go hunt down Ajahn there for more questions. Okay, so let's maybe go say 3 sadhus first. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And then we would like to request Bhante to lead us in dedication of merits.
Akasattha ca bhumatha devanaga mahidhika punyam kang anumoditva cirang rakhantu lokasasanang. Akasattha ca bhumatha devanaga mahidhika punyam kang anumoditva cirang rakhantu dhamma desanang. Akasattha ca bhumatha devanaga mahidhika punyam kang anumoditva cirang rakhantu mam parang. Etavata ca ammehi sambhatang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya etavata ca amhehi sambhatam punya sampadam sabbe sudha anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavata ca amhehi sambhatam punya sampadam sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu.
We would like to request for blessings for paying homage.
Okay. Angato vipassana nagang dhammang vijanatang agge buddhe pasananang dakine anutare agge dhamme pasananang punya kete anutare agasming danang dadatang agam punyang pavardati agang ayuta varno jayaso kiti sukhang balang agasadata medhavi agadam samahito deva bhuto manuso va agapato pamodati abhivadana sili sanicham buddha pachayano tataro dhamma vadhanti ayu vano sukham balang.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let's pay respect to Bhante. Okay, and we would like to invite Bhante out for lunch first. For the rest of us, please stay in Anjali while we lead Bhante out to the Sangha room. Okay, then let's wrap it up with end of service dedication. Please join me in reading of the verses. I dedicate the merits which I have accumulated to the cultivation of my mind in order to bring happiness and benefits to all sentient beings. I dedicate the merits to my parents, children, spouse, relatives, friends, colleagues, and my adversaries, wishing them long life, good health, happiness, and prosperity. May we never part from the Triple Gem, and may we always walk the path towards enlightenment. So that's it for today. And before we go, I just want to remind everyone here to join us for Lo Hei. For those who are not, my bad, I didn't introduce what Lo Hei is for people who are not familiar with this. Think about it as tossing salad together in a joyous occasion. It's fully vegetarian, so you can join us, have fun,